In this episode, we speak to Madeline MacKinnon from naturalhormonehealing.com. She's a nutrition consultant and women's health coach, and she's just released her book, The Hormone Type Cookbook, which is full of recipes specific to your hormone type. Now, in this episode, we'll be exploring the different hormone imbalances, what they look like, and how that might be impacting anxiety for you. It's a great episode full of rich information. If you've ever wondered how your cycles, your hormones might be playing into your mood and how you feel, wondering if it's just PMS or if there's something else going on, or if it's normal, this is the episode with all the answers. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome, Madeline, to the show. It is a pleasure to have you here sharing your wisdom around hormones and women's health. We can't get enough of it on this show because our hormones play such a key role into our mood, our anxiety, everything we're experiencing. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this session.
So let's just start super general. If there was one thing you wish more women knew, what would that be?
I think that having debilitating PMS that impacts the quality of your life is normal.
Yeah.
I think it's something that's been normalized so much. And often a lot of people that come to me, who I interact with, who I work with, they don't even realize sometimes that they have it, or because they haven't been tracking their cycle, they don't realize that they're having PMS around their cycle and PMS anxiety. And I think it's something that first off, we need to build awareness of, but also just know that it's not normal and we shouldn't have to have these debilitating moods. We need to just know you don't have to suffer through that. You don't have to live through that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There are so many parts of our menstrual experience, and even through perimenopause and menopause for women in different life stages too, that are normalized, that where we're told, oh, but that you're just going to suffer through that. And it doesn't have to be the case. And what would you say for someone who maybe has become disheartened with that? Like they've tried all the things, they've been to a naturopath or a functional medicine doctor, or they've done things and it's still, they've adjusted their lifestyle. Is it just that we haven't found the right thing yet? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think there's so many different causes of the same set of symptoms as well. So that's something that's important to understand, is that it's not off, for example, you could have PMS, your PMS could be really triggered by a high estrogen condition, and it could be contributed from low progesterone. Those could be some things that are causing it. And then we also have PMDD, which is a whole other condition that we can definitely get into, that's more caused by our brain are actually negatively reacting to our hormones. So you might have normal, perfect hormone levels, but your brain is not functioning as it should with your hormones. So there's a lot of complexity to it. So I think for someone that's feeling disheartened, I think really working out ways you can dig deeper and knowing that it's not a one size fits all approach to. It might not work from trying a couple supplements and different recommendations. It really is individual for the person as well.
Yeah. And I would say too, just adding to that, it's so easy to be barking up the wrong tree, because you might be thinking, oh, I just need to support my progesterone. I just need to take all the things that do that, when it could be that your body is responding in different ways to the progesterone. So that's not necessarily going to be the right approach. But just winding back a second, for someone who is trying to identify, okay, am I experiencing this? How would we categorize and explain to someone that they are experiencing PMS, anxiety, that sensitivity around the premenstrual phase, that isn't so much just normal? That isn't so much okay, this is like a normal dip.
Yes. Yeah, I consider like normal, what we'd call normal classic PMS would be noticing those changes, slight changes in your mood, those 3 to 4 days before your period starts. Your hormones are actually dipping already. They're starting to go down. So your estrogen and your progesterone is starting to already go down at that point leading up to your period. So feeling, a little bit of that irritability, a little like more bloated, like that's something that your body is, we would technically consider normal. But when it gets to be a problem is when your PMS is impacting, and especially PMS anxiety is impacting the quality of your life. So for example, when I think of, past clients I've worked with in the past, it's like not wanting to leave the house as much during that time, like really socially isolating, but not in a way of like, I want to do some self-care, stay home. It's like being afraid to leave the house to go grocery shopping is something, one of my clients, it was a big issue for her. But or it could be causing you to always like second guess your relationship with your partner. That's a big thing too. But then all of a sudden when your PMS, your period is over, you're like, why did I even think that? And so there's a lot of different, it's like, and then the physical symptoms too, because it's not just mental. When we're in like more issues with severe PMS anxiety, PMDD, you could also struggle with a lot of fatigue as well. During that time, I've had people in the very severe ways, like feeling like they've just been hit by a bus, and or even feeling like you never can really get ahead, like you're always moving, you're trying to get ahead with projects, like doing things, and then it's always like this one step forward, two step back type situation where it's hard to be productive. So there's a lot, it really impacts quality of life in a deep way when we're experiencing it.
Yeah, I remember one client, or actually a few clients, but one in particular is coming to mind, who would experience literally 2 weeks of her life every month experiencing all of that PMS experience. So lower mood, more anxiety, exhaustion, and that was literally 50% of her life. And for
Yeah.
so long, she was told, no, this is just normal, or you're just low in iron, or, those sort of blanket, let's just give her an answer and move on. But
Mhm.
that's so not what we need to be, what we should
No.
be experiencing just because
No, not at all. And that's one of the reasons I got so passionate about working with clients who have PMS anxiety and PMDD, just because I've experienced myself and it was bad for me. And I can tell you more about my experience, but even talking to people now who are struggling, it's just a pretty horrible experience, especially when it's impacting 50% of your life.
yeah.
Like, and then knowing that there are things you can do to feel better, that just got me super riled up when I have clients telling me, oh my gosh, I just had a period that showed up, but showed up in a good way. I'm like, this is what I want to do, because it's so key, so important.
Before we go deeper on your experience, I definitely want to hear about that. What do you think about this almost like aspiration to get to a point where we don't experience any noticeable fluctuation in our mood or anxiety or sensitivity before our period? That idea of like it just showed up. Obviously that's
Mhm.
amazing if that can happen. But is it also okay? I'm of the understanding and perspective and belief that it's also okay for us to go through a natural time where we're not as outward, we're not
Yeah.
as extroverted. We want to just like cozy in. It's almost like our body's built-in recharge system. So where does that idea of it all just like, and then it just showed up, I didn't even notice it, come in for you?
I love that. I love that you're bringing that up because that's so true. Someone shouldn't feel like they've done something wrong if they're feeling, if they all of a sudden they're gonna get they're still feeling some symptoms. It's it's because it's like, even for me, I mostly don't have I don't have severe symptoms that impact my quality of life, but I'm going to notice a change in my libido, a change in my energy, and there's going to be sometimes I feel more irritable. And there is the natural fluctuations of hormones, and we need to honor that. We're not supposed to be go, 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 like working hard throughout the entire cycle. It's
Yeah.
really, we're not built in that. And I think we don't want to get in this mindset of feeling like we should, because that's one of those things that leads to burnout.
Yeah. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to touch on that because I'm so mindful of my listeners are women with high functioning anxiety. We're
Mm-hmm.
perfectionists, we're all or nothing. And
Yes.
it's so easy to hit the bar so high, set the bar so high that we can always be failing. So it's like, oh my God, I experienced some anxiety today. I'm failing. I'm not getting better. Or like I'm still experiencing, I notice a difference before my period. I am a bit different. So just like touching on like, let's neutralize it out, guys. It's not that you have to be like completely
Yeah.
smiley, full of energy in those days before your period. We just don't want you experiencing debilitating impacts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I think that's so important because our hormones are going to fluctuate, and we don't want to set ourselves up for this, like, this is my goal. I'm going to have no PMS and going to feel, amazing throughout the whole cycle. That's really important to be aware of.
I've come to love it too because in a way, as much as I don't want to be experiencing it too much to a degree, but it's like a reminder to clean out my system emotionally too. Like I've been working and riding the wave of productivity through the month, and then it's that time to just go, oh, hang on, what do I still need to feel? What's hanging out in my heart that just needs to come up now to be
Mm-hmm.
experienced and released? And it's nice to honor that too. So I
Yeah.
just want to say that for anyone who is kind of like, oh, I have some of these feelings, but
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that too. They're like really understanding that those things that do come up every month, those could be things that you need to address, like emotional things that you've been pressing down. It also does give you that opportunity to really address those things that you've been that have been bugging you, like just causing like stress, things family members are doing, just things that you really needed to honor in yourself. You can also empower yourself to like really tune in and address it.
exactly. And then there'll be some months where there isn't much stuff to come up. And then those might be the months where you're like, oh, my period just arrived, and that's cool.
Yes.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, beautiful. Oh, good. Okay. So tell me what it was like for you, Madeline, experiencing
Mm-hmm.
PMS.
Yeah. My PMS anxiety was something that would just felt like it was creeping up and getting worse and worse over time for me. This was probably around 10 years ago. And I just remember like feeling like right after ovulation, kind of feeling like a bit of a different person, just feeling like this full switch in my mood. Everything became more overwhelming. Everything became harder, and I was more emotional, more moody. And I definitely was one of those people that didn't feel any anxiety in that first half. And then I had anxiety in the second half of my cycle. And then I had physical symptoms too. I had really sore breasts. That was like my big physical symptom, where
Yeah.
it wasn't just lasting 2 days, it was lasting like 10 days at least, probably even 14 days. So I was like, this is off. But there's a part of me that was kind of normalizing it because no one really was talking about that not being normal. And I was at that time, that's when I was really starting to get interested in like natural medicine and nutrition. So I remember just reading, I think this was from Chinese medicine, just reading that like these PMS, this like those types of symptoms are not like normal. We shouldn't be feeling like, breast pain, debilitating moods for half of your cycle. And that got me interested in you doing some protocols. And for me, I actually found that it was addressing estrogen dominance. So I took some supplements to address estrogen dominance and really worked on my diet then. And it was such a shock for me because just from working on that, it was like the next month I had a period that showed up. And that was shocking because I was like, what? I thought, how could you have it change so fast? And then it kept on happening month after month. And yes, there are some times when I'll feel that irritability, feel that change in like libido. I'll feel those changes, but it was just really shocking, that experience. And that woke me up to realizing, wow, like we can have control over this.
I love what you point out too, because the classic advice around PMS in the natural medicine world, like the real like go to is just support progesterone, like one hormone.
Mhm.
And it's not always that simple, as you just pointed out. And so if you were maybe trying to treat yourself then with just supporting progesterone, you'd be waiting a long time to feel better. And I think that's
Yes.
part of what disheartens people too, this barking up the wrong tree a bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's really frustrating when we think we're doing something, we're putting a lot of energy into it. And of course, we're going to have learning experiences on this journey. It is normal to like go off in that wrong direction sometimes, but it is really frustrating because there's a lot of reasons for PMS and for the anxiety. There's so multiple different reasons. And we can definitely talk about them too, all the different things I've noticed with my clients.
Yes, I would love to do that. Let's go into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that not enough people talk about is cortisol. So in my practice, I do test hormones for almost all of my clients. We run a Dutch test. And I do actually have quite a few clients who've come in with all the signs of anxiety, and the only hormone that's off is elevated cortisol. And when they've started to get their stress levels under control and really take care of themselves and work with their nutrition and everything, like they were able to feel so much better. So that's one thing I think, just supporting the nervous system too, because your nervous system and your cortisol are so connected. So
They
that's one thing.
They are
Mm-hmm.
so connected. And anyone listening, if you experience and you relate to high functioning anxiety, chances are your cortisol levels are
Yes.
elevated. So is
Mm-hmm.
pricked, please, listening to this.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of people could see improvement just from working on the cortisol
Mm.
and really supporting, everything that you're talking about, like in your book and in your work too. I think is really beneficial to do all that work during that time. But cortisol is definitely a big one.
Yeah, and I don't think it gets spoken about enough in terms of female reproductive hormones because it's not directly, in that zone. And we're so used to with this Western model of understanding health and human bodies. We go, oh, well, that's the nervous system, but we're talking about the reproductive system.
Yeah.
It's an orchestra of instruments all working together. If one is playing out of tune, the whole thing doesn't sound so great. So that's what's going on. That's why they're all connected. So
Hmm.
there's cortisol to look into. What else?
So we talked about estrogen. I think really looking to point yourself in the right direction, also looking to see if you have PMS anxiety. If you also have some symptoms of high estrogen, that would be the path that you can start to look into. So other symptoms related could be the breast pain, like fibrocystic breasts,
Mhm.
like if you have lumpy breasts, noticing the bloating, like the PMS bloating, like all over the body, especially. It doesn't have to just be belly bloating, and fibroid cysts, especially not as much polycystic ovaries, but like larger cysts. And so any sort of growths, and heavy periods is another big one too, that could go hand in hand if you have heavy periods and PMS anxiety, because your estrogen is what thickens your uterine lining. So if you have too much estrogen, you could have more heavy periods. So that because when your estrogen is high, that could just tip off the balance with your progesterone, and then your hormones are impacting your neurochemicals in your brain. So everything is so connected. And I think, yeah, high estrogen is a big one.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think one of the biggest symptoms I used to experience too, and I know when I need to top myself up, was the sore, painful breasts. And just like taking care of my, it's like the simplest thing, but magnesium levels, which is a modulator of estrogen, as well as all the wonderful things it does to help relax our bodies, our nervous system, was something for me. And so I notice if I do feel like, oh, hang on, my breasts are starting to feel a bit tender this cycle. Oh yeah, I haven't been having so much magnesium lately. It's time to top that up.
Yeah,
That's
I
a reminder.
actually, yeah, I love that reminder too. And that's something that for me through the years, it's been when, yeah, when I start to notice some of those symptoms come back, like the breast pain, for me, it's like, okay, it means let's get back to my supplements. Let's go back. Where was I stressed? What can I adjust in my diet? It can be, instead of it being something that you feel like you're just the symptoms feeling just out of control with those symptoms, for me it's like a way, it's like gentle reminders of reminding myself to get back to it. I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, 100%. So if we are experiencing this estrogen dominance, what sort of things do we need to look at apart from magnesium?
Yeah, estrogen dominance, I would really look in at diet. So looking at supporting your gut health first, because estrogen, an important aspect of detoxifying estrogen is in the gut. And if your gut, if there's an issue, if there's an imbalance there, so really looking at supporting that through nutrition. I really think having some really good fiber rich foods in the diet, like any, like raw carrots is one that is really popular for estrogen detox, and I do think that can be helpful. Just grating raw carrots in the salad, adding like beets are another of my favorites, so it could be adding a lot of these like veggies in the diet. I have a whole in my cookbook, the Hormone Type Cookbook, I have a whole chapter on detoxing estrogen with food, but adding more of those plant foods just in the diet. You can still have protein, but adding that fiber rich food can make a big difference.
I love how much food can support us, and especially something like the humble carrot, because
Yes.
it's the easiest snack. It's so portable. Like if ever I'm
Mm-hmm.
jumping on a plane or getting in the car, you can always, I know you mentioned to grate it, but like it's so easy just to grab a carrot. You grab the bag of them. They're so cheap.
Yeah.
They last for ages. They'll last you like a week or more in your fridge. And they're the easiest snack to go to, for your body. And how beautiful to know that it's having that medicinal effect for you as
Mm-hmm.
well, helping your
Yes.
body at the same time.
Yeah, the humble carrot. Radishes are great too because they give you that liver support and that sulfur. Uh, it was just from writing this book, it was so interesting to look at all the research behind all the different foods that help support the different stages of estrogen detox. It's impressive actually how much research there is and on food and how it impacts all the whole chemistry of the body and the phases of estrogen detox. So I'm a firm believer that you can make a huge difference with diet. And I think diet is the best way to start.
I agree, because ultimately, like, we can take all the supplements, but we're going to be spending so much money because there's always another supplement you can take. There are so many. Like, I could sit in front of anyone and come up with like 20, 30 supplements that all could be perfectly relevant. But do you want to be paying for all those supplements and taking all of those things your whole life? It's ultimately going to come back to your diet, where you get your nutrients from in the first place. That is how you are consistently caring for yourself. And there is
Mhm.
power in food. But Madeline, just quickly, side note, why do you believe that we, as a society, as a culture, don't put the emphasis on food? Why is it so forgotten? Why is it a surprise that there's all this research that
Yeah,
shows how powerful it is?
it is something that is probably, it was why I started getting into nutrition, because I got interested in it when I was just right in my early 20s. And
Mm.
it came from just being shocked at how our society doesn't emphasize food for
Yeah.
people, even though it can really change someone's health when we have the right nutrition. So I wonder about that too. I think it's just such a lost, just so out of touch. And I do think it is just the modern medicine, how it developed and how it got taken away from alternative medicine. Like there was a lot of work that was really intentional. And I'm not saying this in a conspiracy theory way. It's like the history of how we put like modern medicine and how they really wanted to enforce that is the norm. And then it just took all of the wisdom of food and nutrition away, because it's still really common even in, I love like chatting with friends that grew up in Chinese cultures, learning how food and hormones, there's so much information about food, like eating these specific foods to help your period, to help eat this after your period to build blood. It's like so ingrained, but we've really lost a lot of touch, unfortunately. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. Like we could do a whole other like a
Yeah.
podcast about this, but I would say one piece, I mean, I don't think it's conspiracy. I think there are many alignments with our modern way of medicine that line up with patriarchy, for example. Like we know
Mm-hmm.
there's been so much more research done into the male body versus the female body. There's like patriarchy still very much exists in that realm. We're only just starting to break that down now. Um, and so that naturally flows into disconnection from nature, disconnection from our food. I think there's also a alignment with money and business. Not that money's bad, but it's the egoic need for more money, and that capitalistic idea of just always expanding, where there isn't that space. You can't patent a carrot. You can't like own a
No.
carrot and say, I'm now gonna like, this is my brand's carrot and we can now put this in pills and sell it. Like it's not the same thing. So there is so much more money behind big pharma that allows more research and more attention and more focus, and then advertising campaigns to turn
Yeah.
our focus there instead of the humble carrot. We can come back to
Yes.
the carrot, but good
Definitely. And
example.
and because you can't make much money off research of showing that eating the carrot is good for this condition. You're not going to be able to see that research, and yeah, it is a shame. And I also think that food also works very individually from person to person too, so it's tricky to just study it overall, because it's like your whole diet of like, and what's going to work for you and what's going to help support your vitality. It's very individual. There's
Yeah,
definitely places everyone can start, but it is quite individual.
that's a great point. One other like point that came to mind for me was the fact that, eating a very nutrient dense, healthy diet can be seen as quite an expense and a luxury. However, caveat to that is just taking things out of our diet, like no longer consuming, say, liters of carbonated, like soda drinks and things like that, can make such a positive impact as well, which isn't costing you anything. In fact, it's saving you something. If you switch from drinking Coca-Cola every day to drinking water, you're going to be saving money and you're going to be making a huge impact on your health. So, I think there are some limiting beliefs in that too. And we can all certainly, there's enough on this planet for us all to eat really well and take care of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and sustainably and, economically.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%.
Okay, that was fun. Fun side note. So we've covered cortisol, we've covered estrogen. What's next, Madeline?
I want to cover progesterone very briefly because and then we can talk about PMDD because
Yeah.
that's really important. But progesterone, so progesterone is a hormone. It's supposed to it actually has a calming effect on the brain for most women. Some people don't, which we'll talk about with PMDD, but progesterone actually helps to calm GABA receptors in the brain. We want it, we need progesterone, and progesterone is if you have an ovulatory cycle, if you're not on hormonal birth control, you should be producing progesterone for ideally around 10 to 14 days. If you are in a situation where progesterone is lower, and this is more common in perimenopause, but all ages can experience lower progesterone, then you could also experience more anxiety as well, because you don't have that calming effect of the progesterone. So I really think that's important too.
see how complex it is? Like,
Mhm.
you could have plenty of progesterone and still, but your body doesn't like it for some reason. Or,
Mhm.
there's all these other elements going into it. So it's so important to just like get the testing done or speak to the professional
Yeah.
who can help you figure it out, because I don't think we should be figuring this out on our own. I can't even figure out my own hormones on my own because you can't see stuff in yourself in the same way. Have you
Mhm.
found that, Madeline?
Yeah, I think so. It's not super straightforward, and it is so good to have that extra eyes on us.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's progesterone, and what are some ways that we can support progesterone with
Mm.
food?
Oh, I nerd out on this all the time. This was one of my favorite chapters of my book as well, Eating for Low Progesterone, because your progesterone is needs nutrient, like your body needs certain nutrients to boost progesterone. Like you need zinc, you need selenium, fat soluble vitamin A, vitamin C. All these foods are really, really important, and your body needs it. So I really recommend, first off, focusing on the nutrition and make sure you're getting those essential nutritional building blocks into the diet for sure. And I prefer food as well because food has all of those nutritional cofactors to properly absorb everything. And so I like a couple of my favorite things would be, I do like one food that it always would come down to when I was writing this book was liver. Like organ meats is like the top nutritional powerhouse when it comes to supporting progesterone, just because it has that zinc, it has that fat soluble vitamin A. And there are ways to get around. I know so many people are like, oh, why did she have to talk about liver? And why?
You know
But
what? I know
mhm,
about the nutrient density of liver too. I've still never consumed it in my life.
yeah, I understand. I've actually learned so many sneaky ways. In this past year, I get a organ meat blend that's 90% organs, and I use it for meatballs and stir fries. And the capsules are really helpful too. There's a lot of capsules available. I'm not sure in Australia, but there's a lot available in Canada and the US and in Europe. So you can always add that in as
I'm sure
well.
we can access them, but girl, you are brave. You are brave having it all in there. I mean,
Yeah.
I need to branch out and give it a go for sure.
It's amazing how many people tell me how good they feel after they eat it. So it's intense, the flavor, but if you can add a bunch of caramelized onions on top, it can be really, really amazing. I know people that were eating a whole vegan diet, and then they went and they had some liver, and apparently they just felt euphoric for hours.
How do you coach people around the idea if they are vegan for like going straight onto something like liver? What's that conversation look like? Or I imagine it's highly dependent on the individual.
Oh my gosh, very dependent. And I would never push somebody to eat liver in their
No.
first time afterwards, even though I do have a friend that reminds me that that's what I did with her when she was over at my house sometime. So I do have a reputation for that. But no, you don't have to. I would say like it's just about baby steps and really like understanding like where the hangups are for you around like adding those animal products back into the diet, and knowing it's 100% like a personal choice,
Yeah.
but really understanding like, where are those, and like, where just rethinking them. And then it could just be starting with bone broth, and like, or just some seafood, adding those things in to slowly like wean your way in and just observe how you feel.
And would there be substantial benefits for someone adding animal products back into their diet? Because there is so much, a really strong tide of discussion around taking it all out.
Mm-hmm.
Almost feels like we're going against that right now. Just giving a bit of context for people who are kind of wondering,
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
much.
Yeah, I know, and it's amazing. It's a controversial subject, like to talk about it. But even, for example, when it comes down to protein, yes, you can get protein from or from plants, but the proteins, the amino acid ratios that you're getting when you eat animal protein is really important for supporting your neurotransmitters, like getting that tryptophan, methionine. All of these amino acid building blocks are really important for like mental health. So I think
Yeah.
that could be something to consider. And just it's just about the nutrients over time of like the biggest issue that I have with fully plant-based diets and hormone health is just the lack of bioavailable nutrients, because even zinc, yes, you can get zinc from plants, but it's going to be more absorbable in animal products. So it's more of a nutrient density issue that I think can make a big difference for people when they switch over.
I will add to that just anecdotally, because this is not, a controlled trial.
Mm-hmm.
What I have noticed in the women that I work with, at least 90% of those who are completely plant-based or vegan have gut issues. They often have
Mm-hmm.
bloating, microbiome imbalances. And part of the rationale behind that is that these amino acids are so important for healing our gut lining, building
Mm.
gut lining. Bone broth has so many nutrient benefits too. So it's something to consider. As much as it's so important to love the planet and take care of
Yes.
our climate, I think there are ways to do that somewhere more in the gray area where you're loving and taking care of yourself at the same time. And that's going to come down to so many different personal discussions.
Yeah.
And I really want that anyone listening to this to know I fully respect that. We respect you and honor that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we want you to be at your optimal health and taking care of
Definitely.
yourself too. And
Yes.
we women have a tendency to not do that. We're just like, let's take care of everyone else and take
I
care of all
know,
people
right?
and save the world, but not save me and take care of my body. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just the seed of discussion I want to plant.
Definitely. And look up regenerative farming. Regenerative farming, that is something you can just Google and learn about. How the grazing animals is actually, if it's done properly, it can actually help fight climate change.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing, hey? Because our anxious mind wants to go all or nothing. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
the answer, the place we want to be is usually somewhere around the
Definitely.
middle. Even with like nutrition and healthy eating, right? Like there is room to also have the other foods. I don't know, how do you feel about that, Madeline?
Yeah, oh, I really agree. And you need to be honest with yourself, because it can, being on a restrictive diet can trigger anxiety. I've
Yes.
witnessed that
I've
before multiple times.
I've been
Mhm.
that. I was that.
Yeah. Yeah, so you need to be honest with yourself about that. And if it's triggering your anxiety, then you have to back off. And then it's just coming down to those baby steps. And like because it can be really, as you go down the rabbit hole of healthy eating, like sometimes I have clients that come to me and it's like they've restricted their diet so much out of foods that aren't they don't really need to restrict. Of
Yeah.
course, like if dairy is triggering symptoms, it's better to reframe that of like avoiding that. But too many little things, it can be
And
really hard.
I just want to add this in while we're talking about it because I can't say it enough. Those who are fructose intolerant, your fructose intolerance is a temporary thing. Fructose is one where as we take care of our gut lining, we can build up our tolerance. You might not ever be like eating like half an onion, but you can certainly have
Mhm.
more and more. And so onion, garlic, those kind of intolerances, as we strengthen and address our gut issues, we can increase what we can have as well. So we're not always
Yeah.
needing to cut everything out and thinking like
Yeah.
just whittling it down to nothing. It's like we get to
I
build
can
it
definitely
back
say it in my practice, because I like to check in on my clients, like, a year after we work together. And, the people that do really notice those results, most of them are only really restricting their diet for the period of time as they're healing.
in.
And I really try not to restrict too much at all, but they're only usually, as your body builds up its resiliency again, it can start to add in, like have those foods, like go to an event and have cake at someone's birthday. Like you can eventually have that, unless you do have a severe sensitivity where it's like no gluten for life, but
Yeah.
most people are able to build that up again.
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
And of course, you've got to like, take this advice with a grain of salt. This is, not, we're speaking very generally here. And if you need to
Yes.
talk to your practitioner, you know your body best, you know what's going on for you. So always run that by your individual physician or healthcare practitioner if you need to. So
Mhm.
one thing we haven't dived into is the PMDD. We graced upon it. Let's talk
Yes.
about
So
PMDD.
PMDD is like PMS on steroids. That's
Mm,
what I consider it. It's a very more severe PMS. It's almost like a spectrum but PMDD is where it is really where for a lot of people it's usually doesn't just last a couple days. It lasts right when you start making your progesterone, like right after ovulation, and it can be really horrible in terms of like moods. It's when like you can get more severe depression, severe anxiety. I've noticed that some of my clients have achy joints. They're really tired as well. So it can give you that physical, like even hazy brain fog. And there's going to be, it is a spectrum of an intensity, and it can even be like for some people, they might even feel like suicidal ideation at that time and then feel fine afterwards. So it can be this really shocking thing. And that's when it can be really, you do feel like it's totally different during that time. So PMDD is something. And for most cases of what PMDD is considered is it's not necessarily a hormone condition. It's actually your body responding negatively to the progesterone metabolite allopregnenolone, and that actually causes your GABA receptors to have abnormal response in your brain, and then you can get into more situations of feeling just really really horrible at that time. And a lot of people who do have this PMDD, you might have all felt it for a really long time. It could have started right when you were a teenager, right when you had your cycle, or it could develop at other times in your life too.
And typically there's relief upon the bleed occurring.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've heard so many things like our education around our cycles is so, just Chinese whispers sometimes. And I know a lot of people sometimes say, oh, like, yeah, I have my period now and I feel really flat and low, which is quite a different thing to PMS or PMDD, which is really we're
Mm-hmm.
talking the pre-menstrual time before you start bleeding.
Yes, it's that premenstrual time. You
Yeah.
can still, usually you might, if you feel bad during your period, that would be from another reason. And I do see clients that have the pain and the PMDD, which is even worse because then it's more than half of your life. It's like the pain for during your period and PMDD.
Mm.
And there is, yeah, I'll talk about, there is even a link between PMDD and endometriosis I can share too, but I need to lay a bit more groundwork too of what we can do to address it, because it can feel super disheartening when you have it, because especially if you've had it like all of your life. But there are things that you can do to normalize the GABA receptors and help to normalize that response. So one thing I get super passionate about is talking about histamine intolerances, because no one talks enough about this. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Lara Bryden. She has some great books, and she has a lot of really good info about histamines and PMDD anxiety, because I didn't know about this until a few years ago. And then I started noticing that a lot of my clients who had severe anxiety, I would get them to list out some of their symptoms of histamine, and a lot of them had issues with histamine.
Mm.
So histamine is like, you produce histamine is something we think of like allergies, like when we're sick, but histamine is a part of the immune system as well. And your body produces histamine, and then it also takes in histamine from food. But there is one thing that's really interesting is that there's some people who when there's problems with histamine clearance, it can actually cause some issues with the GABA receptors, and it can worsen your PMDD. And this, it might not be for everybody. I do have clients that I see who have PMDD, but they don't have histamine issues. But I have just been shocked how different people feel when they address it and like lower some histamine foods in their diet. And then it really helps address symptoms. So we can talk about some of those histamine symptoms too, because it can be pretty life-changing to figure out if you have a histamine issue.
Yeah, I'd love that. And just FYI, for anyone listening, we have had Lara Bryden on the podcast a couple of times.
Oh,
So there are some episodes to go back to if you are resonating with everything we're discussing with Madeline and you want to know more. There are some great episodes with Lara. But in terms of histamine, yeah, what does that look like and what can we do?
Yeah. So histamine, so there's a big list of histamine symptoms, but most notable ones would be, and this isn't, I wouldn't, if you just have one of these symptoms, it might just be that you have those symptoms, but
Yeah.
it's usually like we're looking at your cluster, and it's still super important to talk to a practitioner about this too,
It's
because
so easy with these like general symptoms, like fatigue. It's like,
yeah,
oh, we all can experience fatigue for different
exactly.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's important to list these because people might really resonate with them. But usually I'm thinking like allergies, like seasonal allergies.
Mm.
Like, or like you're waking up every day with a stuffy nose and you don't know why. Skin conditions, so like rashes, hives, eczema, headaches. Is like headaches and migraines is a really big one. Headaches and migraines, and just brain fog. Of course, we have all brain fog, fatigue, digestive issues. But those, like, even anything, even it could be related to asthma, but like a lot of those things like allergy symptoms. So maybe you have a lot of these like histamine allergy type symptoms like rashes, hives, crawling sensation on your skin and you don't know why. No, those are some. There is like, you can look up a list of them, but I think it's important to understand this, and as well what I'm noticing, if it gets worse at different times of your cycle. So you could actually have the histamine getting worse around ovulation or
Yeah.
like before your period too, is a big
Yes.
one.
And so
Yeah.
these are the people who get confused because they're like, wait a second, ovulation's when I'm meant to be the happiest and the like most feeling my most sexy
Yes.
self. And it's like, if that's you, this is probably something that's going on. It's something to at least explore the
Yeah.
possibility that you might have a histamine issue.
Yeah, explore it, especially if you have this PMDD that's impacting the quality of your life. It's 100% worth exploring it. As I just remember I had one client, she was a police officer and she was been like diagnosed with depression. And then she was able to like address the depression throughout the entire month, but then she still had the PMDD symptoms. And what we did is we lowered her histamine specifically with diet, and she was just amazed. She felt energy again, like felt like her moods balanced out. And that was like one of the first clients I worked with on that. And that got me like, I need to spread the word about this, because it was pretty amazing seeing how she felt better from that. But with histamine, so we want to look at, typically with histamine, it can either be your body is having trouble like processing the histamine that you're taking in through food, or you could also have issues where your body is just producing too much of histamine too. That's called mast cell activation syndrome. That can be something. And really what you can actually improve is by lowering foods that are high in histamine. Some really high foods are actually, there are a lot of the healthy foods that we think are really healthy, and they are, but it's just, again, it's a problem for people with histamine intolerances. But the big ones is actually spinach, avocado, and tomato. And I know so many people that put spinach in their smoothies and like eat avocado every single day. Those are like more of like vegetables, like eggplant, sometimes citrus, and then any like canned food. So canned fish, canned tuna, canned sardines, even though I love sardines so much for hormones, canned sardines could be an issue. and like just a lot of more like preserved food, vinegars, wine. And then there's some people that find dairy can be a histamine trigger too, especially like hard cheeses. So that's something to start with. I think that it is really important. Like if you are going to do low histamine, it can be really, I don't, the going down the research Google rabbit hole can get confusing because there is conflicting information. So I recommend, yeah, pick up, work with a practitioner so you can get some plan and support. Or there's like Dr. Becky Campbell is an expert in histamine, and she has some really good books out there too that people can check out and start to learn about as well.
So this is where the people who are like, I think I'm getting it right with the Mediterranean diet, because there's all this amazing research about the Mediterranean diet for our health overall, our cardiovascular health, our mental health. And then it's like, well, but if we've got this histamine issue, possibly not so good, because then we got wine, we've got cheese. And I definitely notice I don't have a lot of dairy, but when I do have it from time to time, especially I love some yogurt, I will feel that like the back of my throat, that post-nasal drip.
Definitely. Yeah. I find avocados can trigger. I used to eat a lot of them, and that's like my one food I don't eat as much now because of the histamine.
Oh. And then we
also
the right thing with avocados because of the fats, and the fats
yes
blocks of our
I know
hormones.
that if you don't have an issue with avocados, eat them because they're so good for you. But for those histamine, it can be a pretty amazing to see the difference. And also the thing to know about histamine intolerances too is that it doesn't have to be a forever thing for a lot of people. It can be something that can be like, as because we can also have reasons behind histamine intolerances. So even having really like an estrogen dominant type situation, or even high cortisol, gut issues, those can actually be linked to histamine. So everything is such like a rabbit hole. And but I think, if somebody's like, okay, where do I start? Like I've had a lot of people hear my information about histamine and just stopped like the spinach and the tomato and like the fermented foods and like vinegars, just something super simple, especially thinking about the foods that you're eating regularly. They just cut those out and they started to notice like, oh, my postnasal drip is going away. Like, so that's something that is important. I know I did mention, I do want to chat really quickly too, is that endometriosis, there's and PMDD, there is a link for some people too. So if you have been diagnosed with endometriosis and PMDD, and you're also having histamine issues, when you have endometriosis, you can get into like a mast cell activation issue where you're producing more histamine because of the endo. And going on a like lower histamine diet can help with the pain and PMDD if you experience it. So that's one tip if anyone is listening that the struggles too. I definitely recommend like looking into that as well as a possible thing that could help you feel better, because it could help with your pain too.
Yeah. And I love you just, adding in there with the foods and the changes we can make. It doesn't necessarily have to look like a whole diet overhaul. Some change is better than nothing, because with histamine, it's the overall load.
Yes.
So, we just want to reduce the like load on your system. You can't get it perfect. You won't completely, eradicate.
Yeah. And just look, because it could be maybe you're drinking wine every night and you're having avocado in your salad and you're eating spinach in your smoothie every single day. It could just be lowering that load. And like the wines, those can usually be one of the biggest, because there's a different like spectrum of how high of how much food is gonna high histamine foods. There's some that are more intense than others. So I always recommend starting with just the basics.
Wine is definitely a big one. And that is another one. I can't do it anymore. Like it's too much load for my body. Thank you so much, Madeline, for coming on the show. And now, of course, if anyone needs more guidance and there have been things that you've resonated with there, you want to go and look at how you can support your body with food to clear that excess histamine, to reduce the load, to look at your estrogen levels, your progesterone. Madeline has this amazing cookbook called the Hormone Type Cookbook. Where can we get it, Madeline?
Yeah, you can go to naturalhormonehealing.com/book, and it has links to everywhere, all the suppliers, but it's available worldwide, Amazon, all big retailers. It's available at the Book Depository in Australia. And I had a client who got it delivered the other day, and it was so exciting that it came to Australia. And yeah, you can check out my work, naturalhormonehealing.com. And I do have a free PMS guide if you're wondering where to start. So you can go to naturalhormonehealing.com/PMS.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. That was really cool. And
thank you.
like we have talked about PMS on the show before, but it always takes us to a new place. There's always so much to go into with that. So I really appreciate the discussion and your insights.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to announce my new book, The Anxiety Reset Method, is now available in bookstores across Australia. It's on booktopia.com and Book Depository if you're international. This book will help you create the resilience you need to thrive and keep that anxious mind in check. Broken down into weekly attainable goals, the Anxiety Reset Method will take you on a journey to show you that you really can master that anxious mind. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.